Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. There is a lot happening in matters concerning parents and children right now. Every week we hear of the latest kerfuffle at a school board meeting with parents taking on trustees. We read about some parents' growing concerns over what they deem to be ideological-driven education, or we see some protesting at a family-friendly drag queen story hour at a public library. And these issues matter. Children are the future, as the saying goes. Therefore, their education and formation should be top of mind for us all. So, what exactly is happening within our education system to draw the ire of some parents? Today, we're going to do a roundup of the latest issues and headlines from school book bans in Manitoba to gender policy review in New Brunswick and alarming language coming from some trustees in Ontario. Well, joining me now to unpack it all is Dr. Teresa Pierre, President of Parents as First Educators. Dr. Pierre, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm happy to have you back on again.
Good morning, Tanya.
So one news headline that caught my attention, I kind of followed it along for the last several weeks, was a situation in the Waterloo Regional Catholic District School Board, and that's a board in Ontario, in southwestern Ontario, with respect to a trustee named Wendy Ashby. Could you please explain what happened and what did she do that drew concern of actually broader society, not just parents?
Yes. So Trustee Ashby issued a couple of tweets in the last few months, starting back in October. And one of them stated that the most dangerous creature on the planet is the white Christian male. And a second one, it referred to white women as the willing servants of the Christo-fascist patriarchy.
Oh, wow. Those are some bold words.
Let's remember that this is a Catholic school board, and she is calling out Christian white people. Like, all groups should be protected from that kind of language. And apparently people felt the same in the board. So they packed the boardroom to complain that this language was being used and saying they didn't feel confident in her to be representing the board as a trustee anymore, that it was really a governance issue now.
And when you said they packed the board meeting, who is they?
Parents and concerned community members.
So parents were really upset because I read this across the country. So this clearly went beyond the borders of Ontario and made its way into some national papers.
It even made it into international papers. It made it into the pages of Newsweek. So, yeah.
Okay.
I think that parents are getting a bit bolder in saying that they're not going to put up with this kind of behavior, all kinds of behavior on the part of elected officials. So we've really seen a very busy month with all kinds of issues boiling up, and parents going to speak out and say, this is wrong. We're not going to put up with this.
So for what Trustee Ashby said, I mean, thank you for sharing those quotes from her tweets. Did anybody step up to defend her? What was the defense? What was her defense for saying these, what seemingly are very inflammatory statements?
The board initially did nothing to censure her, and she didn't apologize for months and months and months. And when she did finally apologize, it was a kind of, I apologize for saying this, but I'm sorry if people were offended. So it was kind of an apology that was half-hearted, that seemed designed to quiet things down, but it didn't say, I'm not going to do this again, and I'm deeply sorry for the people that were offended by this. It just didn't have that tone of realism. So then parents said, they went to the board. There were 7 delegations, which is our parent speakers at a meeting, and they called for her resigning. There were 2 petitions at least up. The Parents as First Educators petition garnered about 3,300, I think, signatures from the area, and it was the story in the region of Ontario day after day for weeks.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. We're going to pick up this discussion because I want to discuss, why does this matter? Why do parents care about this? And we'll be right back after a few short break. Welcome back. We're unpacking a plethora of issues affecting parents and children as it relates to education. And joining me for this discussion is Dr. Teresa Pierre, President of Parents as First Educators. Dr. Pierre, before the commercial break in our previous segment, we were discussing the fiasco, really, at the Waterloo Regional Catholic District School Board in Ontario with the now resigned trustee, Wendy Ashby. You shared with us some of the seemingly inflammatory comments she said on Twitter. And to be quite frank, it did catch me off guard to hear these statements. They do seem very racist. Why does it matter what a trustee tweeted out? So she shared her opinion and she put it on Twitter. Why should that matter?
Well, it just does not assure her impartiality and any vote touching these kinds of issues. And how are the white Christian members of her ward going to feel asking her for help? Are they going to feel like they're going to get a reasonable reception? So I don't think so. So it affected her job performance really all across the board, considering the makeup of the board.
Okay, let's switch gears here and let's talk about the New Brunswick Gender Identity Bill. So there is going to be a review going in onto their previous policy, I think 713, about gender identity, and this is in New Brunswick again. So what is Policy 713?
Policy 713 is a policy that assures the safety of LGBTQ plus students in the district.
Okay, and when you say safety, were they in harm's way previously, or was there a need to have this special policy?
It's a very wide-ranging policy, so it allowed for things like students to identify as whatever gender that they like, and the teachers should respect that. It allows them to have their pronouns, the chosen pronouns, respected. It allowed students to attend gay straight alliance meetings without parental consent.
And gay straight alliances are clubs, are they?
Are clubs for students at school, okay, based on their gender identity.
Okay, so why is this policy now being reviewed by the Conservative government in New Brunswick?
So the concern, as stated by the government, is that hundreds of parents contacted them about the age appropriateness of the benchmarks in the sex ed program. So because of that, apparently they are opening the whole policy up to review. Okay,
and why is this an issue? I mean, when I hear governments reviewing things that they've done, either programs or policies, I think that's okay. I mean, one wants to look at the end result, but why is that drawing the ire of some of the critics?
Right. Well, it's really a hotbed issue, and somewhat unusual that a government in this day and age would touch it. So the LGBTQ plus side of the equation wants to make sure that no inroads that they've made are lost, whereas parents are saying, this movement has brought a lot of problems with it, including early sexualization of children being transitioned without parental consent, and books in the libraries that parents don't feel are appropriate for their children to be reading. So I think it's really the government is, and kudos to them, saying we need to step back and see if maybe this social movement has gone a bit too far and is not protecting the interests of children as they should be.
And one thing, and you highlighted this with the GSAs, with the gay straight alliances, but was the pronoun use. So pronoun he, him, she, her, they, them. There's a plethora of pronouns out there. That a child could pick their own pronouns at school, but the school wouldn't have to inform the parents. Again, with the GSA, the child can join this club, but unlike other clubs, the parents would not be notified. Why is that a concern to you as the head of a parental rights organization?
Right, absolutely. Parents have the right to direct their children's education. That's guaranteed in international law, as well as their medical knowledge should be, the first realm of the parent. And we don't think it's appropriate to shut out parents from this equation, which is pretty much the situation across the country.
Okay, we only have about 20 seconds. What do you expect will happen with this in New Brunswick?
I think that we may get a revised sex ed curriculum out of this. Any movements to change the benchmarks on this will be fantastic.
Welcome back. We're unpacking education issues as it relates to parents and children. Again, joining me is Dr. Teresa Pierre, president of Parents as First Educators. So we're going to move from New Brunswick and now go to Manitoba, where a school board rejected a committee that was proposed that would review books, and some saw this as potentially a book ban. Teresa, could you please explain what happened here?
Okay, so there was a trustee who put forward a motion to have a book banning committee established in the board. And the concern was that there are books with really pornographic, very graphic sexual content. And among those books are books that describe the LGBTQ plus experience, but it wasn't only books of that nature. And they had a 6-hour meeting in a school about this. The trustee, whose name is Brianna Siklicki, made a wonderful case. She was so eloquent in her defense of children and why this was really dangerous for children. We've seen similar campaigns going on really across the country in Chilliwack and recently in Ontario in the Durham District School Board, where parents have read aloud some of these books and they had to get shut down during the presentation.
Sorry, so why were they shut down during the presentation for reading the content?
The books are too graphic.
So these books that are in their children's school libraries are too graphic to read out loud at a school board meeting.
But not too dangerous to leave in the libraries, apparently. Yes.
Wow.
So this trustee said, this is wrong. This should not be happening. So unfortunately, she did not carry the day. There were 6 trustees who voted against her. And she was the lone voice speaking out. But it sure was a long, argumentative evening.
So if I understand, she just wanted to strike a committee to review the books, not necessarily to ban them, but if the committee found something that they thought was unsavory or, as you mentioned, allegedly pornographic, then they may pull that book.
Right, exactly.
But don't such committees already exist? Like, I know in our local public libraries, there's a committee that reviews books, what they're going to stock, what they won't stock. Do we have duplication? Is this relevant to current issues? There already are committees like this, but are there none at school libraries?
No, I think that each individual library probably reviews its own materials, and it's all left up to the local people to decide. And I think what they're trying to do is put some written guidelines that will prevent these abuses from taking place.
Got it. So this speaks to me in a broader sense, the issue of free expression, as we say in Canada, free speech for those who maybe are more American-minded. Is it actually appropriate to ban books? I mean, it's a library. So let's talk about public libraries, and we can talk about it in the context of schools, but is it appropriate? Is that hindering children's learning?
I am a big advocate of free expression as well, and I think it's very important to let people say what they have to say. However, I do concur that books that espouse outright hatred, that would be seen as inculcating hatred in the reader towards another race, or are very graphic sexually, that's just inappropriate for the age of the children that we're talking about. We're not saying don't publish them in the world, but we're saying don't have them in the libraries of schools.
So, do you know of any books that have been successfully banned in school libraries?
I would say that the momentum right now is to not ban books. So there have been lots of books that were complained about. Those Durham parents that I mentioned had a number of books that they were trying to draw to the attention of the public, and including Ellen Hopkins' Identical and Genderqueer, a Memoir. Now, Ellen Hopkins' Identical was also on the topic at the Brandon meeting. And then there's, King and King, lots of books aimed at like young children that have been the subject of complaints as well.
Because they promote gender ideology?
Correct.
Okay, and we only have about 10 seconds left, but I guess I would sum it up by saying, but if the school curriculum promotes gender ideology, why wouldn't there be a parallel in the library? And we'll unpack that in just a few moments.
Okay.
Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion here on parental rights, children's access to potentially disturbing material in their school libraries. And joining me again is Dr. Teresa Pierre. Teresa, before the break, we were talking about what was happening in Manitoba with a trustee who is potentially proposing to have a committee to maybe ban some books that were viewed as pornographic or age inappropriate. We mentioned a lot of these books seem to be interlaced with gender ideology. But if the school curriculum supports in the classroom the teaching of gender ideology, why is it so controversial then to have resources that support, or books that support, that kind of ideology in the school library?
Well, it's not controversial by the current standards that are in place everywhere. However, that's really where we need to be putting our pressure, is to push back against these established norms in the sex ed programs across the country. And that's why the New Brunswick situation is so interesting, because really it comes from the highest level and with the curriculum, and then it trickles down to all the ways that people do things day to day in the schools. So then if you have the sex ed teaching, about gender ideology and trans kids to middle school kids, then you're going to have books like that in the library as well. So, what we really need to do is take a step back and say, what are we teaching these kids? And do we need to revisit that?
Well, let's talk about what some teachers are teaching children. There is a school teacher who was, I believe, recently suspended in Ontario, who's a former lawyer who then became an elementary school teacher. And from what I've viewed from his tweets, he takes a real joy and pride in providing or educating his children on gender ideology and gender politics and sexual identities. Tell me about this teacher, Paolo De Bono, and why was he suspended?
Correct. So Paolo De Bono has for a number of years promoted to teaching of gender ideology in the classroom. And he launched a public campaign in the fall to have the Catholic curriculum on religious education not published anymore by its publisher. And this caused extreme waves. Like there's nothing that he won't say. He seems to have no constraints to follow the Catholic teachings on sexuality.
And he's a Catholic teacher then?
And he's in a Catholic school board in Toronto. Yeah. Though he gets around because he also recently went to be a delegate in the York board about flying the pride flag in that board. So he was put on home assignment after that evening that was captured on multiple news sources, arguing and baiting parents who were there to say that the flag is not appropriately raised in Catholic schools.
And why So why was he put on home assignment? Because did his teaching college feel that his behavior was inappropriate? What was the issue?
No, well, this was a board decision, and because it's concerning employee details, they won't release the details of what exactly was said. All we know is that he's no longer teaching in the classroom. We don't know for how long that might be. He may be back in the fall. We're not sure.
Well, so this Mr. DeBono, and again, I've viewed some of his tweets in preparing for the show. He seems to be what one would call an activist teacher, and he makes no bones about it. He's really upfront with it. This is what I want to promote in the classroom. We should all be doing it. Everybody getting on board. Why is that really an issue? We have about 30 seconds.
Right. So parents have described the kids coming home saying things that are contrary to the parents' faith, and being very upset. Also, not doing apparently a lot of work in the classroom.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have today. And, we're ending it on a very controversial note, but that's okay. And we'll have to have you on again to unpack, as it seems like these issues are percolating everywhere. Thank you, Dr. Pierre.
Thank you, Tanya, for having me.
There's a lot to ponder here, as clearly these issues are not going away. And the question remains is, are schools an extension of families, of parents, or are they an extension of the government? For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.